Those Space People, a podcast series of casual cosmic conversations with people working on exciting space projects. Today we have Harleen Kaur Munn with us. Harleen is an astrodynamics and SST specialist with Okapi Orbits, which is a German SaaS startup offering collision avoidance software for satellites. Harleen has a background in aerospace engineering and is almost done with her PhD as well. So let's dive in and listen to Harleen talk about all her research. Welcome to the podcast, Harleen.
Thank you, Rachna. I'm very excited to finally talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. So your current role, your title at least at Okapi Orbit sounds so interesting. So can you talk about what you do?
Yeah. So I mostly work on orbit determination, but determination using GPS. So it could be precise orbit determination, but also the initial orbit determination using, let's say, some observations, optical observations or otherwise. So that is something, that is something for a new project. Because I was working with the optical observations before when I was in Bern. So we have, for example, the angles from the optical observatory, and we use the right ascension and the declination angles to compute the initial orbit of a satellite or a space debris. So I'm doing something similar at the moment, but I'm also working on collision avoidance and generation of maneuvers. So yeah, it's a lot of new stuff and yeah, exciting.
Wow, that sounds so interesting. I'd love to go a little bit deeper into that. But before that, so you're almost done with your PhD at the University of Bern in Switzerland, right? So
Yeah.
can you talk about your research and what your thesis is about?
Yeah, my thesis was about trying to make the initial orbit determination more precise. At Bern, we get observations from the Zimmerwald Observatory, which is, let's say, the second most busy observatory in the world. And it's a big thing considering the weather in Switzerland. So, yeah, we get the angular positions using the telescopes there and using those angular positions, I tried to compute the initial orbit. So we already had some existing methods, but I was trying to add perturbations in the initial orbit determination, which was really, really hard considering that we do not have, let's say, analytical models for each and everything. And I was also looking especially at the high area to mass ratio debris objects, where the solar radiation pressure has a higher impact. So I was trying to add some iterations of numerical propagation using solar radiation models so that I could at least take care of some perturbations. And at least my results told me that we need that if we want to recover an object after 1 or 2 days when it's a geo object.
How exactly do you start about estimating the whole trajectory thing? Because from my limited knowledge, I know that we have something called the TLEs, which are published by NORAD, and there's also a bunch of terrestrial radars that also track a lot of the space objects. But again, there's a limitation on what the size of the space object you can be tracking. You can't be tracking millimeter sized things. Of course,
Yeah.
it's so far away. So these are the different data sources, and of course the University of Braunschweig has also been doing it for a while. Can you walk me through this whole process? So you have these data sources, and then what happens?
So we have all these data sources, radar or optical telescopes, and then we have, let's say, the data sources give us the angles or ranges depending on the type of data source. If we have radars, that will be something for low Earth orbits, up to GTOs, which are like the transfer orbits between the low Earth orbits and the geostationary orbits. So for the LEO orbits, we get the ranges and the angles using radar. And if we have two types of observations, or let's say a series of those observations, so we get three, two angles and one range, and then we have the same at a different point. So we get six values, and we use those six values to let's say, get the initial orbit. There are different initial orbit termination methods, but they mostly work on different number of iterations and trying to remove other possibilities and trying to see how much transfer time is there between the two observed values. For example, my object, for example, has traveled from one point to another in 6 hours, and it's a low Earth orbit. So we can say that it has made two revolutions something. So the result that I get using the initial orbit will be a result which will be for two or more revolutions. So we try to limit the number of possibilities that we have for the orbits because we will have multiple possibilities.
Oh, that's so interesting. That's so interesting. If we consider objects in the low Earth orbit, the atmosphere is quite dense, so the cross section area of the orbit, plays a major role in determining the trajectory because a larger cross section, of course, slows it down and it disintegrates. And I'm assuming for example, if it's an active satellite, then of course one knows what the attitude can be, and we know it's completely intact. You know the structure and can estimate. But what about space debris? How do you do that?
For LEO objects or LEO debris, we have multiple scenarios. For example, some of the people are also doing attitude determination, or let's say try to find out the tumbling rate of the debris objects in the LEO objects. And they try to do this using light curves or using laser ranging. So we are using different type of sensors to get different types of data. So different kind of surfaces reflect light differently. And some of them, for example, bigger in size or more reflective objects are going to give us different results. So using the light curves, we can try to find out, okay, that this is the rate of rotation, or if it is reflecting this much light, then it will be this type of material.
Wow, that is so cool. So you're basically bouncing off laser beams from the Earth?
Yes, yes, we are doing this. From the observatories, we have some cool pictures of the Zimmerwald Observatory. I think if you go to the IU website, you'll definitely find a picture. I think one of my colleagues took it, where you will see a green colored laser shooting from the observatory dome into the sky. Yeah.
Wow, this is so cool. This is so interesting. I mean, attitude determination, this whole astrodynamics, aerodynamics, or orbital mechanics, whatever we call it. I think this is hands down the sexiest part of science, part of space, because it's so cool.
Yeah, that is the reason I got attracted to it so much, and I have been running after it since. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I totally get it. I mean, space bug, once it bites you, there's no turning back. I absolutely get that. So, since you mentioned your that let's talk a little bit about your journey maybe, because you did a bachelor's in aerospace engineering, and then you did your master's, again space related master's at ISAE, and then you're also the PhD, and you did all of these one after the other. So how important is getting a PhD or a master to pursue a career in astrodynamics?
I would say that you can pursue a career in astrodynamics even after the master's. But for me, it was, for example, let's say the hunger for learning more, the hunger for research. That's what I would call it, because even my professors and let's say my thesis head at Canes, where I did my master thesis, was somebody who looked at me, and someone who was coming on the weekends to look at the results. Oh, what happened with my models or the gravity field models? Oh, what kind of perturbations do I get? Why do I get these kind of orbits? And he saw me once and he was like, okay. So the next time I saw him in office, and he was like, okay, I know you like space too much. So, and then that's why I shared with him when I got this position. And I was running after orbit determination. So I would say if you really want to learn something, it's better that you spend some time in research rather than jumping straight into industry. At least for astrodynamicists or so on, I would say that if you spend some time in research, try to spend some time with the problems and how you can solve them. That is going to really give you a new perspective on when you're trying to solve problems in real life, for example, to get results faster, because you will know already that this is something that is going to work and this is something that is not going to work, because that attitude is something that you need before you are solving astrodynamics problems in real life. But it really depends on how much hunger you have, or yeah, for orbital mechanics and so on. Yeah, and I have been very hungry.
Wow, that's so cool. And this puts things into perspective because often my advice to people who want to pursue a career in space is to, after the undergrad, try to get your hands dirty, try to work in the industry or somewhere or any kind of institution, and then look for your masters. But then maybe for astrodynamics, this is perhaps the path. That's interesting. Yeah, so again, space situational, so astrodynamics and all this, tracking space debris or space objects, all the laser ranging, this all kind of comes under space situational awareness, which is a very broad umbrella term, very much like, I don't know, like AI, artificial intelligence, because it encompasses so many things, neural networks, I don't know, machine learning, a lot of these things. So, what all areas or what really constitutes space situational awareness?
So space situational awareness will comprise of the elements where you try to track objects. So there will be surveys where you try to see whatever you see in the sky. For example, basically all the debris that you can identify. And then again, try to compute their initial orbits. So you know that which of these orbits are known, which of these are new orbits. And then next will be try to know more about the kind of objects that are there in these orbits and how they are moving there and how these orbits are changing over time. And that will give you, for example, an overview of how the whole environment changes over time, over months, over years, over days. So it comprises of a lot of things. So there will be people who will be, for example, working on radars, or let's say trying to set up optical telescopes to try to see space debris. There'll be people who will be observers doing night shifts, trying to see things. There will be people who will be writing softwares in the observatories, trying to do the pre-processing. There'll be people who will be doing initial orbit termination, people like me. And then again, there will be people who will be working with the light curves and try to find the attitude of something, or try to find how something is moving. So, and then there'll be people who will be, let's say, I did some part of it, but try to maintain the catalog, try to update the orbits with time. And there'll be people who will be working with numbers over time, how all these orbits are evolving over time. So it's, I mean, when I talk about this, it seems like there are a lot of people, but there's a joke inside the space debris community that the community is actually very small, that you talk to two people and you talk to them about someone, and you are definitely going to find a common contact between you and the other person. So it's sadly not that big a community as it should be, considering how things are changing with space debris.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially with the insane number of constellations, satellite constellations that are being planned. And nowadays there is near collision almost every week or every other week. So we're all playing kind of space dodgeball, trying to prevent all this. So, how do you think all this will pan out, right? So, if we consider space debris, uh, Kessler syndrome, anybody Googling space debris, they would come across this term Kessler syndrome. So, do you think we might approach this, or yeah, do you think the way the whole industry is headed, we might skip this crazy insane phase? Because right now, like for example, there's Okapi orbits, they're trying to map, provide better analytics, better intel to satellite manufacturers. There's also a lot of companies trying to do active space debris removal. So in light of all these things, how do you think this will play out?
I would say that we are still going slow when I look at the whole space industry and how we are progressing. If we look at the plots, they are pretty famous plots. You can find them at ESA or at NASA websites, where you see the number of space objects over the years and how we see how it will pan out over time. And you will see a kind of exponential increase over the next 2 or 3 decades. So I would say this decade and the next decade are very critical, especially this one. So if we are not working towards active debris removal, or for example, active debris removal is what we need, because everyone wants to take care of their assets. I mean, okay, there's money involved, so everyone wants to save their satellite. They want their services to be not affected. But at the same time, there will be a time when everyone is not availing the services, but there there will be more dirt. Let's say things are going to get dirty in space. So if within a decade we are not putting policies on the paper and with people's heads and with the satellites, then yeah, it is going to get very hard. I am not sure if we are going to get as bad as the Kessler syndrome says, because that will be a pity, looking at how we are developing things now. But I would say that this should be the priority. This is where the money should be going. This is where people should be going at the moment. And sadly, this is not what we see now.
That's too bad. Yeah, of course. I mean, anything in space historically has also been driven either by political will or a business case. So hopefully one of them will come in to kick in and then prevent this. But that's a very short timeline. I mean, in a decade is very small.
I would say in a decade, things, or let's say in the next 2 decades, there's going to be a lot of increase,
Wow.
because it's going to get harder and harder. In the next 4 or 5 decades is is something which will be, let's say, irreversible. So the time to act is, let's say, 1 or 2 decades. We don't have much.
Wow, wow. That's okay, that's not good as somebody as somebody who's part of the whole upstream industry building satellites and contributing to the space debris. That's not good to hear. But yeah, but I see a lot of satellite manufacturers also actively thinking about it. You know, they're thinking of either putting a tiny, either using the onboard satellite propulsion system to deorbit at the end of life, or deploying some sort of drag sails. Drag sails have been demonstrated already a long time ago, right? It's nothing new. In spite of these measures, do you still think it's going to be quite, quite bad or quite dirty, as you said, in the next 2 decades? As in, do you think the satellite manufacturers would not really act on this?
I would say that we need a strong incentive to work. We need to be forced to do something. And in space, it's mostly business. We mean business. So when things are going to get a bit dirty, that's when people will think that it is actually good business, that we should invest money in making things more clean. That's why I said things will get a bit dirty, until people realize, until there's that incentive, until there's this force that is pushing people towards making things more clean. And like you said, that yes, there are a lot of people trying to do end of life disposals, but when you look at the numbers, the percentages are still not very good. When you look at how many percentage of operators actually tried, and how many of them actually, let's say, could get their satellite disposed with the right propulsion, the numbers are still low. I mean, not all of them, not all the people who are trying to do this are able to do this. And not everyone is even trying. Let's say, I would say less than 50% are trying. And less out from those less than 50%, maybe half are failing. And this is something that is there in the public reports. So there was this report that I was looking at, let's say, repeatedly when I was working on my PhD thesis, and also when I was working with another master thesis student at Okapi. So you can look at the plots and the numbers. It's all public. You can go to the websites, you can go to the ESA websites, you'll find the space environment reports. I think they update it like every year. So just go there and read, and you will get to know how things are. I am not exaggerating anything.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I did look at, you just do an image search of space debris, and there are so many, there's a lot of visual evidence right there. But yeah, wow. It's a bad metric. I mean, less than 50% of satellite manufacturers actually give a damn about this is not good. So it's crazy. What's also interesting is how the attitude, I think, towards space sustainability or space debris is quite different across geographies. You must have read this, the Starlink licenses being cancelled by France recently. I think it was last week or this week.
Yeah, I have not been, for example, I haven't been following it, but Starlink anyway has been pretty interesting because of other reasons. Yeah.
Why do you find Starlink interesting, if I may ask?
I mean, first of all, as an astronomer, or when I was, for example, between the astronomers in Bern, uh, it was something that was disturbing the night sky. That is a way of putting it. For example, the night sky will not be the same or is not the same with Starlink there. And also, it's adding, let's say, some sort of noise when we are trying to track objects. We just have more noise, or let's say we can get it confused with others. And at the same time, we have a big number of satellites in orbits which are already densely populated. And there has been a lot of conjunctions like that the Starlink satellites have had, I would say, with a lot of other satellites. So even though we are trying to do the maneuvers and, or for example, with time when we look at the collision probability, it decreases. But just to have these many number of conjunctions and have this number of satellites in a densely populated area, it just doesn't ease the things. It doesn't ease the situation.
Interesting. So speaking of, I mean, of course, these explicitly these two were the reasons why actually the French Supreme Court or some court essentially canceled the licenses. One is hindrance to astronomical observations from ground and also contribution to space debris. But speaking of the first one, which is hindering astronomical observations, if we look at terrestrial telescopes, they're already located quite far away from from cities or human dwellings because of the light pollution. So would it be like a logical next step? We've taken the observatories away from the cities because there's too much light pollution, and now there are too many satellites. So how, I mean, we can also move these observatories from ground to space, right? Like, of course, not a James Webb Space Telescope or not like another dozen of Hubbles, but maybe smaller satellites. Do you think that would be sufficient for astronomy?
Yeah, that is something that is in work, I would say. There are some people who are trying to do this. And this is something which will come up in the next few years. There are people working on space telescopes. And yeah, we are going to get space debris observations from space. But again, I would say that things are still moving a bit slow, because when we talk about building big networks of telescopes or radars somewhere, then building things in space or sending things or telescopes in space is also going to take some time. And this is just the part when we are trying to track and monitor them over time. This is, for example, we are not at a point where we are trying to do active debris removal, or where everyone is following, for example, the end of life disposal rules that we try to set.
Yeah, I mean, I think only time will tell how it's it's gonna pan out. Another question regarding the space debris. So, for air traffic, we have air traffic controllers, and they're all there's an air traffic controller network, and it's quite localized, and it doesn't really matter because we have planes, we have pilots speaking different languages, planes, from different makers and so, but we are still quite able to regulate the whole civilian space quite well. Is it, first of all, technologically, is it feasible, and also maybe politically, or I don't know, legally, is it feasible to have some sort of a space controller network similar to the air traffic control we have right now?
I would say that is one of the biggest challenges, to have something which works, for example, internationally, which is also something that is happening now when it comes to space debris disposal, or, for example, what to do with space debris. There are some ideas, for example, which suggest that we can use the space debris to create something new. So the space assets are, for example, always there is something interesting when it comes to space law and space assets of different companies, different countries, governments. So this is something that comes in space and defense for most of the countries. So I would say that we still are, let's say, not there. We are not there. So it's not going to come up, I would say, in the next few months or in the next year or so on. But there are people talking about this. So this is needed for space debris, but this is also needed, like for outer space assets and other things, that we need to come up with proper space laws and rules where, yeah, and everyone following them, not like what is the situation at the moment.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, space law, like all international law, is quite tricky to enforce. So, of course, yeah. But yeah, let's see. I mean, this is, I guess, one of the great filters, perhaps, for humanity.
Yeah.
So, also, you have quite a bit of an international experience. You know, you've done your you briefly interned at CNES. You worked on the GNSS processing, and now you're with a German startup. And you also did your PhD at the University of Bern, which is again in Switzerland, the German part of Switzerland, but still Switzerland. So, how do you see the work? How are the work cultures across these geographies different?
I would say that the journey has been quite interesting, and it always amazes me to see that how different people have approached to do things differently. For example, I would say that in Canes, things were, let's say, more relaxed when it was when we compare it to, for example, the Swiss university environment or the research environment, I would say. So, but I would tell you something that is consistent everywhere is the hunger of the researchers, the craziness of the researchers or the scientists or the engineers who are always staying in the evenings to see the results and to see actually that,
Wow.
yeah, this is what is actually happening. This is something which is universal. So you talk to anybody and you talk about the feeling that you are trying to crack a problem and you just want to see that how it is going to get solved and what is happening, because this is not what the result should look like with a given model. And yeah, it doesn't matter how many holidays everyone has in a year or how many work hours each culture has, but that scientist or that engineer is going to stay there to look at those results. So, yeah, this is something consistent between all the cultures.
Wow, that's so fabulous. I mean, it's when you're so passionate, I guess, about work, then there is no work and personal life difference. It's all one single passion that's driving you. So that's great. That's so cool. So do you speak French, or did you have to learn to speak French or German?
Yeah, I speak French. I learned French a bit before I went to France, and then I learned French in France as well. And I became almost fluent in French
Ooh la la.
at the end of my master's, though I would still, I still call myself mediocre, but in a job interview with someone, let's say a manager who spoke to me in French, The whole interview was in French, and he told me that I should change in my CV, that my level is not intermediate, that I can speak French.
that's
I never did
that's
it,
amazing.
but my position, changed because when I was in Bern is bilingual, let's say. So I survived there because, yeah, I could at least get my official documents in French. But I started learning German in Bern. I did not, for example, get too far with German. I'm still in the beginning levels, but I did enjoy it. I picked up some words and phrases in the dialect though, because that's the thing in Switzerland. It's not exactly that language spoken in that very manner in the place. That's why it's a bit tricky for a person to learn that language inside Switzerland, because the dialect is still different. So either you learn the dialect, you speak the dialect, and yeah, that's it. Or when you learn a language, then you try to practice it. People will switch it, but it's not like staying in Germany and speaking German. So it helps a lot here because, yeah, I still use some words from the dialect and some French words when I came to Germany. And yeah, it was pretty funny because I tried to talk to people and the person was looking at it and I was like, what did I say wrong? I was doing this every day in Bern. And yeah, but yeah, now I would say that I'm getting more comfortable with German, and I try not to switch to English or any other language unless I, yeah, absolutely have to.
That's so cool. I mean, you seem to have an amazing flair for learning languages.
Yeah, I like languages, and I also think that we have different experience when we actually learn the language. I saw this in France, and I really loved my time during my masters and in Toulouse, and yeah, or in French part of Switzerland. Whenever I want, like let's say I wandered to Montereau or somewhere near Matterhorn, and I'm talking to people in French, and I was so happy. So I was like, yes, yeah, that's why I. So there's always a difference when you can speak the language, then you can connect more, and you just feel a part of this new culture. But I would say that still you have this thing inside you that you have two cultures, or in my case, many cultures inside you. Now, I don't know what people would call me. They'll call me Swiss in some ways, French in some ways, and maybe now I'm becoming a bit German, yeah, with some things. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the beauty of it all, like, right? Moving to a different country, living in a different culture. That's the whole experience, and language is, of course, the biggest part of the whole immersive experience. So yeah, it's absolutely great. Unfortunately for me, I live in Berlin, and every time I speak in my very bad German, people think they're doing me a favor and switch to English. So and then sometimes I think I should really move to a, I don't know, a very remote god-forsaken part of Germany and just stay there where not a single soul speaks English. So within a month, I'm my survival instincts kick in and I'm fluent. I don't know. I've never tried to speak French. I guess the only word I know is "oui," and I'm pretty sure I'm not pronouncing that right. but but yeah, German has been quite an interesting language for me as well. But the space community is quite international, right? Did you ever have to speak the local language, or was it English? Was English always mainstream?
I would say that France, because I was in Cannes, and even in general, um, you mostly speak and yeah, talk, even work in French. But I talked with, for example, my supervisor in English because there were things that were at stake, and I did not want to speak French regarding those things. But I still, for example, learned a lot of technical words while being there. So I would say in Cannes, the working language is French. So, but it's a government space agency, so I wouldn't expect anything different. In Switzerland, in Bern, because there are more Swiss Germans in Bern than, for example, French speaking people, or more German speaking people than French in Bern. So people would mostly talk in German, unless, for example, there are people who cannot talk in German or do not know that much German, and then the conversations will be in English. But most of the documents will be in English. But since, let's say, before I started my PhD, a couple of years before that, things were still in German. Let's say the institute seminars were still in German. When I was there, there were some guest lecturers, and there was a guest lecturer who was, let's say, a colleague of someone who won the Nobel Prize for physics that year, a couple of years ago, someone who had worked at the University of Bern. That person gave a presentation about exoplanets in German, so there were some guest lectures in German as well. So most of the undergrad studies are in the local languages, and people talk to each other in local languages. But in the institutes, or where, for example, there are some international people, you would speak in English and work in English.
Okay, that's good. Nice, interesting. So, circling back a little bit again to your work, how does your typical day look like? So, is it filled with a lot of simulations? What kind of softwares do you use? What kind of do you use a lot of programming languages?
Um, I use a couple of programming languages, and the workday would be, let's say, so I would say maybe none of my work days are the same.
Wow.
I can't say that this day looks exactly like yesterday, or this is exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow. So there's going to be some difference, because you are trying to solve problems, trying to create new things, or trying to, for example, develop software. Uh, and then there are always new things. You always try to improve things, make things better. So I would say that most of the work days are uh, consisting of either orbit termination or some other projects that we are working on. For example, in Okapi, we are also working on different projects. So it could be working, let's say, for a given project on one day, or working, yeah, on a given task on one day, and the next day moving on to a different task that needs to be done.
Okay, wow, wow, cool, interesting, very interesting. So, how many people are at Okapi right now?
At the moment, okay, keeps changing. I have to make sure that I don't tell a wrong number.
I totally get that. I mean, I also
I think it's 14 at the moment, 14 or 15. Yeah.
wow, that's a big number. I mean, from the last time I spoke with Christina, yeah, you guys have grown quite a bit. Nice to see that.
Yeah. We are going further.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow, that's great to see. Yeah, and I absolutely get it. At a startup, I'm always counting. You know, every time someone asks me how many people in your company, I'm like, wait a second, it was 15 last Monday, but then we hired a bunch of people, so it's always changing. But yeah. So what's your team at Okapi like? What kind of geographies they come from? What kind of backgrounds do they have?
I would say most of my colleagues are German. So, except, yeah, actually, I'm the only person, I'm the only Indian. Yeah, I'm the only non German on the team, the moment. But I hardly feel it, because the environment is super nice and super fun. So I just don't feel, for example, someone as who is an odd one out.
I absolutely get that. I mean, I think it's the case with the space industry because it's so close knit and everybody working in the space industry is so passionate about space and that's what connects us. A lot of my German friends, for example, have more in common with me, you know, who's not even from Europe because we are both passionate about the same thing. So I totally get that.
I think space people are like a cult. Yeah.
I would I would prefer to call it a family. Yeah.
But
But yeah, but yeah, secretly we know it's a cult.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So, what kind of backgrounds do they have? Educational backgrounds or technical backgrounds?
Um, Most of them, for example, have done aerospace engineering from TU Braunschweig. So yeah, and for example, in case of Christina, it will be more towards business. But most of my colleagues and people in the science team, especially, yeah, are people who are engineering people. Yeah, and very space people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. True, true. So, in the beginning of the podcast, you mentioned that it's advisable, especially when pursuing astrodynamics. It's always good to spend as much time at an educational institution or pursuing a master or these kind of degrees to get as much knowledge as possible. But is that a really hard requirement? Is it possible for somebody with just a bachelor degree to, kind of jump into it and learn things on the go?
Yeah, it's absolutely possible for someone after bachelor to jump into, for example, tasks at hand and learn about astrodynamics. But I would say that the environment really matters. That you're doing it, I don't know, as a bachelor thesis, or you are doing it, for example, for a project for the company or so on. Because when you're working, let's say in a company, the requirement will be to get things done, I don't know, as fast as possible, maybe, for example, to find the solution for a given problem. And maybe you cannot spend that much time with a problem that you can spend in research or, for example, in a student project. That's one reason why I said this. And in fact, but I would say that many people differ on this. So maybe people who are in research or have been in research are biased towards this. But there was, yeah, the same thing. One of the professors at University of Bern, he told me the same, that the time we get, for example, during PhD years is something that we are never going to get, even after PhD, for example, in postdocs or otherwise, because in PhD we have a lot of time to go deep into the problem, and it's just amazing. Like you can just, yeah, you can absorb everything, and yeah, you can get a lot of phases of the problem, and it's just different. But it definitely depends on what a person wants to do. Are they invested in something that much that they would want to spend that much time solely on something like this? I was someone who was very invested, and I always wanted to do orbit termination. So for me, it was clear that, yeah, I wanted to spend time with this problem.
That's interesting insight. Thanks for that. By the way, how did you develop this interest in attitude determination? Was it from your undergrad days, or when were you first exposed to this?
Um, I would say it was in my bachelor days. Yeah, it was in my undergrad days. So I was always interested in space, even as a child. And there were things that were even remotely related to space that would interest me. And I was, for example, I would like the gravitational laws or those kind of things in school. And yeah, then in undergrad, I worked, for example, for maneuvers and orbit determination of a given spacecraft that we tried to use to remove debris. So it was an active debris removal project that we proposed in a competition, in an international competition. So it was during that time that I realized that this is something that I like the best, and this is what I want to do. So I was, yeah, continuously going after orbit termination. But I got, let's say, a sneak peek when I was in 11th or 12th grade, because during that time we learn about things like gravitational laws and how they change, how gravity changes with time, and how to compute orbits. And I have always been interested in orbital geometry as well. So without knowing it, I have been always interested in things that I was going to use in orbit determination. So I liked those things, and the combination of those things is what orbital mechanics is basically.
Cool. Wow. Wow. That's so you're a physics person, and then it was a natural transition for you.
Yeah, a physics and a maths
Math.
person. Yeah.
Yeah, that the second part is very important because I also absolutely loved physics, but for some reason I could not digest so much of math to pull off orbit determination. So yeah, I just here I ended up just in absolute fascination of ADCS, but not touching it, not going anywhere near it because the math is too much for me. Cool. I'm glad you're doing this. Great. We all know that we are absolutely not doing enough to combat the whole space debris problem and ensure sustainability in space. So, what do you think should be the immediate action taken by the whole community or the whole world, let's say? Who do you think, like, for example, do you think the governments should be doing this? Satellite manufacturers should be doing this? Should we be, what exactly should we be doing?
I would say that we need the government, we need action from the governments and international players when it comes to, for example, whoever is involved in space. And we don't need just more, let's say, dialogues. We need more action, because dialogue is what has been for a long time. So we need quick action. We need to make rules. We need to stick to them. And yeah, we need to start acting. That is what we need.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Humanity is a very chatty species, so our dialogues can take quite a while.
Yeah.
So we should be putting more resources into monitoring, into removal, into mitigation, basically everything.
Yeah. Everything. Yeah. And we should make this a priority now. Everyone.
Yeah, hope all the fellow contributors to the space debris will keep it in mind
Yeah. I hope so too.
and do the needful. This was a very interesting chat, Harleen. By the way, do you read any space science fiction or watch any space sci-fi?
I would say no. I do not read much of sci-fi, but I watch occasionally. But my expectations are very high. So I, when there is something that I just think is not possible, so at that point I'll be like, oh no, just try to spend a bit more time, try to invest a bit more when you're trying to do something, yeah, so cool. So but yeah, so I watch sci-fi movies occasionally, but I do not read a lot of science fiction. So my reading is yeah, it's quite diverse actually, but no, less of sci-fi.
What's the movie or a series that came closest to your expectations?
I would say that I liked the movie Gravity a lot. So that is something that I really liked, and that is something that I would still use to try to explain how space debris would affect a given problem. So I really liked that movie. So yeah. And Interstellar, of course, but I would say there were some parts where let's say it could have been better, but a lot of things were very well done in Interstellar. So I really enjoyed watching both of these movies.
Oh, wow. Could you care to explain which are these parts in Interstellar that could have been done better?
For example, when you try to show the entry part near the black hole, because that part should have been more intense from my point of view.
You mean from a cinematic experience or from the.
No, from physics or from more how things would affect a spacecraft at the time of, for example, how everything will be changing, and will a person or will a spacecraft will actually survive that kind of a force.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 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 absolutely. Well, yeah, I've never thought of that. I mean, I thought, hey, you just waltz into a black hole and then ta-da. But of course, you probably won't be alive. So, interesting. And probably the very
Yeah,
definition of consciousness changes.
but we needed that for the movie, so yeah, it's okay. But they did great when it comes to images and yeah, trying to visualize how everything would look. And hey, let's not forget that they tried to give us the black hole's image there.
Yeah, I mean, Interstellar, obviously, it was one of the. It's much needed, even though it kind of stretches the whole physics a little bit and takes a
Yeah,
lot of cinematic freedom. But I believe such movies are very important to engage the population,
yeah,
the
yeah.
public in science. That's cool. So I'm glad at least there are some movies that you approve of. Next time I'm going to run a lot of my books or plots or anything I'm going to watch, I'm going to run it by you and see how much it scores on a
uh,
scale. That would be good.
no.
Oh, you should always ask an expert. I mean, you're one of the experts. So I'd love to ask you.
Thank you. Yeah, but I am not watching those many sci-fi movies myself. So, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it's probably sci-fi for you, that kind of insane physics for you on an everyday basis. So you probably don't need space sci-fi.
yeah, yeah.
Cool, cool, awesome. Yeah, it's been a really fun conversation, Harleen. Thank you so much for giving your time on a Sunday.
Thanks to you, and it has been really fun.
So, if space enthusiasts or students or space debris activists want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do so?
I would say LinkedIn would be the best way. Yeah, they can write me there, and I will, yeah, definitely get back to them.
That's great, great. And thanks again, Harleen, for your time. And it's been a really fun conversation.
Thank you, Rachna. It was a pleasure.